This is Pastor Jonathan with Robertsdale UMC, and I am so glad to see you on this Saturday. It's a beautiful day, and as we continue our 31-day challenge in the book of Proverbs, I'm enjoying this day. I'm enjoying the presence of God and the beauty of the weather, and it is just a good day. But today, I got to be honest, we're going to get into some sensitive material. If you've read Proverbs chapter 5, you know what I'm talking about. So right at the beginning of this video, I'm going to have a disclaimer of explicit content warning. There are some adult themes. This chapter is all about adultery and the folly of committing adultery and the faithfulness of marriage. It is not PG rated, so if we have any viewers that are concerned about that, viewer discretion is advised, especially for the young or parents of the young. We're dealing with themes related to marriage and the adult marriage relationship and the importance of faithfulness. So that's what I've come to talk to you about today. So let's get straight into it, Proverbs chapter 5. And we'll ask what God has to say to us through this today, not just to the married, but to all people who are attempting to live in the wisdom of the Lord. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey. That's a good thing, by the way. Honey is sweet and desirable, right? And her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your best strength to others, and your years to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth, and your toil enrich another man's house. At the end of your life you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I have come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. Drink water from your own cisterns, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. I skipped the page. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. The evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly. So, intense chapter, right? And I want to make a couple of observations. I'm going to try not to preach a sermon. I get that opportunity tomorrow at Worship Live at 10 a.m. right here on our Robertsdale UMC Facebook page and our website, robertsdaleumc.com. But this is not a sermon today. This is a daily Devo. And so in an attempt not to preach a sermon, I do want to make a general observation that in the book of Proverbs, as we said from the beginning, we don't want to get lost in the details so much that we miss an overarching theme. And that theme throughout the whole book is that there are really two paths in this life. There is the path of wisdom, and there is the path of folly. And being on one path means you come out at a particular destination. Being on the other means you come out at a different destination. One destination is desirable, the other is not. And it is even man's wisdom that sometimes tells us to take the wrong path leading to the wrong destination, and then we're surprised when we get there. And we wonder why we didn't end up where we wanted to be. The two paths are also described as women. Wisdom is personified as a desirable woman to be in relationship with, to follow, to nurture that relationship with her so that you can reap the benefits of knowing this woman called wisdom. The other woman is folly and foolishness. And Proverbs, this will not be the last time that Proverbs talks about an adulterous woman, because the concrete, real scenario of adultery is a metaphor for going with the wrong woman, the woman of wisdom or the woman of folly. And so this father, Solomon, is trying to impart on his sons the importance of choosing the right partner, choosing the right relationship, and therefore setting your feet on the right path so you will end up where you want to be. Now, speaking specifically to adultery, there's one possible issue that this chapter creates that scholars have identified, and that is simply the issue that this is only written from a man's perspective. It was written in a man's culture. It was written in a patriarchal culture. It was written by a man to his sons. And so this chapter, which is about adultery, is only written from the man's point of view. And that's important in terms of interpretation, because it's not necessarily the woman's fault. This makes the adulterous woman out to be an evil woman trying to manipulate and ensnare. And certainly we know of real life scenarios where that has been the case. But we also know of scenarios where people get desperate and people get lonely. They're in toxic relationships or even abusive marriages that are not good for them. And in a moment of weakness, they reach out. But the seduction of the situation is the same. And the point is, you don't want to go there. You don't want to participate in someone breaking covenant in any way. And you don't want to be seduced into breaking any covenants that you have in your life, marriage or otherwise, but marriage being the most important. You know, it's interesting, in a book that is so much about sharing and giving, and God being a self-sacrificial and self-giving God, there is one thing this chapter says you are not to share, and that is the intimacy which belongs to your partner, the intimacy that belongs to your spouse. That is not yours to share. In fact, it tarnishes the gift that you're giving them to share that level of intimacy with anybody else. This brings to mind the word chesed. It's a Hebrew word, and in many Bibles in the Old Testament, the word chesed is translated in different ways. It's translated as mercy. The New American Standard Bible translates it as loving kindness, but a two-word translation for that one Hebrew word would be covenant faithfulness. Chesed is one of the primary, perhaps the primary attribute of God in the Old Testament. In the same way that love seems to be the primary attribute of God in the New Testament, there is only one verse in the New Testament that says God is, and then one word with a period. And that is in 1 John, where it says God is love. In the Old Testament, you might say God is chesed, or the primary attribute of God is chesed. Therefore, if we are to live a life according to God's wisdom, we are to live a life that embodies and lives out God's faithfulness. God is a God who's faithful to His covenant. That's why it is so important for us to be people who walk with integrity, people who keep our word, people who aren't eager to get out of our covenant or get out of our agreement, but people who are eager to honor what we've said and live above reproach. I'm scanning the chapter to see, I thought there was one more theme that just kind of spoke out to me. Oh, I remember now. So at the end, the way the proverb ends, in verse 20 it says, "Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife?" And then it says, "For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord." So for one thing, just knowing that the Lord is watching everything you do, that sometimes we make personal excuses for our choices because we think this is personal, this is just me, I'm not hurting anybody, I can do what I want. But if your relationship truly, if your life is truly a life that is in relationship with God, then nothing we say, nothing we do is outside of that relationship. Nothing is certainly outside of the view of the God who is all present and all knowing and all powerful and all loving. And he uses this word captivated. Why be captivated by this adulterous woman? God examines all our paths, and the evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline. He will be led astray by his own great folly. The word captivated there is the same word in each of those verses. Why be captivated by this woman? Because if you give in to being captivated by her, you will be captivated by folly. You will become a captive, a prisoner of your own folly. And judgment here is a picture painted all throughout the Old Testament. A lot of people think that God is an angry, judging God in the Old Testament, and He is very actively at work judging people and bringing calamity and hardship upon those that He doesn't like or that don't please Him. When really the Old Testament paints more a picture that judgment is God taking His hands off and allowing us to live out the natural consequences of our bad choices, which in some ways is worse. God just says, you know what, if you're going to choose this, at some point, judgment means I'm going to back off and I'm going to let you live into the natural consequences of what you're choosing. And so that's what this proverb is getting at, is that if you choose to be captivated by this woman And we can generalize this and say anything that seems to be seducing you or pulling you out of a faithful life, just know that captivity is the end result indeed. You will be a captive of folly. You will be a prisoner, and the consequences will not be good. Now I want to end by speaking on a personal level because I have to be honest, and I'm not saying this boastfully or braggadociously, but this is not something I've experienced. I have known people that have cheated on their spouse, or they've been cheated on, or their marriage has ended over an act of unfaithfulness. And quite honestly, not everybody would agree with this proverb. The proverb is seeming to say it is as simple as this: adultery's bad, it looks good at first, but the end result will be misery, don't do it. And some people would say, you know what, that's not my experience. I was in a terrible marriage, I was miserable, I found this other person. Yes, I felt ashamed and guilty as we were being unfaithful and I was stepping outside of my marriage, but the end result ended up me leaving this covenant in which I was miserable and starting a new life with this person, and honestly, our life has been wonderful. But honestly, I have to listen to Solomon on this, and I have to believe that what he's saying is true, because when I have those conversations with people, there always seems to be something lingering, something behind what they're telling me, that true happiness and true fulfillment is still being stunted. It's still not there, and sometimes that relationship, even delayed, ends up breaking down in the long run. It ends up not being all that it was meant to be, because that covenant that was started in unfaithfulness, I mean, how good can a faithful covenant be that started in unfaithfulness? So I want to say two things about that. One, even if it looks good for a while, it may end badly, and there may always be a level of guilt and shame, at least buried deep, that God wants to heal, that relationship just doesn't allow for. The other thing is, if you feel like that's not the case, maybe that's because there's nothing that God can't redeem. And so I don't want to speak guilt and shame into people's lives when it's not there. I don't want to bring up 10 or 20-year-old wounds and you believe that God wants to rub your face back in that, because he doesn't. God is about healing. God is about shalom. God is about bringing us to wholeness and completeness. He takes our broken story and our mistakes and he makes something beautiful out of it. The point that I'm trying to get at today is, what does faithfulness look like today? There is this reality that we can change paths, that if we've been on the wrong path, or a long time ago, if we know we stepped off the right path, God can redeem that. God can do good things out of bad choices. But there's also this reality that we still walk sometimes with the consequences of what we've done, and that takes time. It takes time for God to heal that. It takes time, and there are some times that we say, my life will never quite be what it could have been had I made different choices, but I'm doing the best I can today. And that's the point. Choose faithfulness, because faithful is who God is. It's his primary attribute, covenant faithfulness. So let's be faithful people. Let's be people of integrity. Let's be people who are grateful and humbled before a God who takes all of our mistakes, all of our failings, all of our bad choices, and still chooses to do life with us and make something beautiful out of it. So I just encourage you and challenge you today to take some time and pray and say, Lord, what does it look like for me to be faithful today? Is there an area where I'm not as faithful as I could be? Is there an area that maybe I've slipped up, that I've fudged the lines ethically, or a place of integrity that I need to make right or make amends for? Is there something for which I have never really asked forgiveness? I've just tried to blow and go and move past it because I don't want to face it. And God, you want me to come to terms with that face to face with you today. Take some time. It's Saturday. Maybe you have more time than you usually do during the week. But get alone with God. And if nothing else, just meditate on his faithfulness and be grateful for how God never runs out on you. This is Pastor Jonathan with Robert Stowe UMC. God bless you today. Grace and peace.